David Deptula is a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General and Dean of the Mitchell Institute of Aerospace Power Studies. Welcome to our program, General Deptula.
It's great to be here again. It's been a while since we've chatted, but I'm glad to catch up.
Russian dictator Vladimir Putin said that his army would finish off Ukrainians. How does this sound after 3 years of Russia's military setbacks in Ukraine?
Well, I think it reflects the intent of Mr. Putin, and that's what he's interested in, is trying to capture all of Ukraine. It's very evident in the fact that Ukraine has expressed a willingness to accept U.S. proposals for a ceasefire as part of some ongoing peace efforts. But Putin, on the other hand, has described the U.S. peace proposals as unacceptable. His preconditions for any kind of a ceasefire, Putin is insisting on terms that would effectively dismantle Ukraine as an independent functioning state. So Putin doesn't want peace, he wants Ukraine, and he's prepared to do whatever it takes to achieve his objectives. For Putin, the peace talks are simply another means to conduct psychological warfare. Now, President Trump wants the killing to stop to save lives, but Putin doesn't care about lives. He only cares about exerting control over Ukraine. And while Putin could achieve a ceasefire immediately by halting his aggression, he will not do so voluntarily. He needs to be forced to do so.
We will cover with you ceasefire talks after the several questions, but I also would like to cover Russia's recent decisions. Vladimir Putin has called up 160,000 men, Russia's highest numbers of conscripts since 2011. What does this decision indicate as President Trump tries to negotiate a ceasefire, as Vladimir Putin trying to calling up more men and women for this war against Ukraine?
Well, I think it underlines and demonstrates the point that I just made, and that's that he's really not interested in achieving a ceasefire or peace, and quite frankly, he just wants to send more people to get killed in what he believes he has an advantage in, and that's conducting attrition warfare. The fact of the matter is, while that is a World War I tactic that saw millions killed, Ukraine has responded with initiatives to a degree that has allowed it to hold off or stave off any kind of additional incursions that Russia might make by simply throwing more personnel into the fight.
You just mentioned that Vladimir Putin believes that he has military advantage over Ukraine. Do you personally believe that Russia has a military advantage over Ukraine in this fight right now?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't want to parse words here. But he doesn't necessarily have a military advantage. He has a size advantage, okay? In terms of the relative populations of Ukraine and Russia, Russia is certainly bigger. In terms of numbers of forces, Russia is bigger. But that doesn't necessarily mean they have an advantage. Remember, this is the leader who thought that he could capture Kyiv in 3 days. And here we are 3 years later. And that's, again, because of the persistence, the values, and the innovation that the men and women of Ukrainians military have exhibited in defending their country.
And do you believe that Ukraine can still turn the tide in this war despite all the odds?
Yeah, no, absolutely I do. The fact of the matter is that Ukraine is going to require support from friends, partners, and allies. in order to allow it to sustain its operations. But there's no doubt that character and the will of the people are a fundamental element of warfare, and that's where Ukraine has an advantage.
Also, recently, Ukraine has struck Russia's Engels 2 strategic aviation airfield, destroying 96 Russia's cruise missile. How can you assess this result and other results of Ukraine's deep strikes inside Russia?
Yeah, well, these deep attacks highlight an air power warfighting truth that's backed by history. And that's striking the source of offensive operations contributes to preventing attack from before it happens. Now, as you're well aware, but maybe not everyone in your audience is, Engels Air Base houses 3 types of Russian bombers: the Tu-95, the Tu-22, and the Tu-160, all of which are regularly used to launch missiles at Ukrainian cities. So it's logical that this airbase is a top priority for Ukraine's long-range cruise missile attacks. But as you stated, these attacks are not just about the bombers. The destruction of those 96 air-launched cruise missiles at Engels meaningfully degraded Russia's capacity for missile strikes. So in fact, many assessments out there deem this the most successful Ukrainian targeting of a Russian munitions depot in 2025. So for similar reasons, Ukraine's increasingly been targeting weapons factories, ammunition warehouses, and aviation fuel depots far inside of Russia. And that reduces Russia's ability to wage war and its aerial bombardment of Ukraine. So deep strike and denial of sanctuary are enduring advantages of air power.
And also, we just discussed support for Ukraine from European allies and other partners. Let's cover also the support from the United States. Can Ukraine turn the tide without the support from the United States and without American, US allies, American administration green-lighting long-range strikes inside Russia?
Well, once again, you know, I've long been in favor of not putting any restrictions on weapons that would be offered to Ukraine that otherwise would yield the Russian sanctuary. I mean, that violates all the principles of warfare. But to get back to your original question, I think it's still a hypothetical, and I sincerely hope that the United States continues its weapons support and support writ large for the principles and the specifics for which Ukraine is fighting. Whether or not this administration will continue to do so and why is a question I can't answer. But the rest of the countries who make up Europe understand the significance of what's going on, and I believe you've already seen their commitment to continue to support Ukraine.
From your perspective, for how long Russia is prepared to continue to wage this war against Ukraine right now? How do you see Russia's next war planning?
Once again, the only person who really knows the answer to that question is Mr. Putin. And I think that the words that I spoke earlier are still appropriate, in that what Putin is interested in is not peace. He wants to expand his influence in recreating a Russian empire. And a key element of that is for him to gain control over Ukraine. So the only way that he is going to stop is by imposing pain and essentially taking actions that would force him to halt his aggression. I believe that you're aware of the fact that President Trump understands that as well and is considering additional measures to encourage Russia's participation in meaningful negotiations, and that includes secondary sanctions on Russian energy exports. So Russia is, they're hurting very much. And the last thing that needs to be done is to ease up the pressure on Russia's economy as well as its military capability. And ultimately, that's what will force Putin to the negotiating table.
And do you believe that these sanctions, secondary sanctions and tariffs would be enough to force Putin to negotiating table, to force him to a full ceasefire?
Well, once again, sanctions 3 years ago didn't do a whole lot in preventing Putin from continuing with his aggression. But because of the condition that his economy is in, imposing secondary sanctions on Russian energy exports would have a significant impact. Whether it would be enough, that's yet to be seen. But those sanctions from the United States, in addition with increased support from Ukraine's European allies, would certainly make Putin think twice about whether he wants to continue with his aggression.
Also, US President Donald Trump is getting angry with Vladimir Putin, according to Fox News. Also, Trump's administration officials are getting frustrated with Russia as Putin is delaying ceasefire talks. According to Reuters, what would you personally advise Trump's administration to how to force Vladimir Putin to agree with ceasefire deal from a military point of view? What would be your advice from a military standpoint?
Well, the fact of the matter is there needs to be a recognition of the elements that I mentioned. What Putin values is force, period. He's only going to respond if he understands that his ability to continue his aggression is going to be impeded. Now, whether that is accomplished through sanctions against his economy or by continued military support that prohibits him or prevents him from any significant military advantages, that's certainly all part of the equation.
And how do you assess Vladimir Putin's greenlighting this partial ceasefire in the air and at sea? Don't you think that it could be beneficial for Russia to stop Ukraine's strike on Russia's energy infrastructure?
This is what is challenging about negotiations, as well as the underlying military backdrop behind them. It is a question of, okay, what are the relative strategic military advantages? So that is certainly part of the equation. But those proposed cessations of hostilities with attacks against energy and those in the Black Sea certainly wouldn't halt critical strikes like the one we just discussed at Ingalls Air Base. So it's a complex question, but one that has to be determined by Ukraine's leadership when entering into these kinds of negotiations. But as I mentioned earlier, President Zelensky's already expressed willingness to accept the U.S. proposal, and Putin has turned it down. So, next move, Putin.
Also, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron are leading the coalition of the willing countries who are ready to deploy troops to Ukraine in case of a ceasefire deal. Don't you think that it is too early to discuss such military plans as Russia just has rejected Trump's proposal on a ceasefire?
Well, I don't think it's ever too early to talk about courses of action. And like you stated, both France and the United Kingdom are looking at alternatives, and both have committed substantial military and financial aid, including vital air defense missions. The coalition also reached consensus on sanctions that none imposed on Russia should be lifted as part of any temporary ceasefire agreement. But it's still unclear if the deterrence mechanism that's being discussed by this group is victory, peace, or just keeping Ukraine in the fight. The success of such a coalition is contingent on credible security assurances that Ukraine can win against Russia. So we'll see what happens as time moves on.
Let's cover also situation in the Middle East. US President Donald Trump threatened Iran with bombing if Tehran did not come to an agreement over its nuclear program. Also, the US and Israel are preparing to launch a strike on Iranian nuclear program, according to Daily Mail. And my first question would be, is the US Air Force capable of eliminating the whole Iranian nuclear program and also underground bunkers with missiles protected there?
Well, the short answer is yes. They do possess that capability. And, you know, it would be wise for the Iranians to understand that and come to the negotiating table with respect to creating assurances that they won't proceed with their nuclear aspirations. And yeah, that's what governments do with respect to security options, and that's to have a spectrum of courses of action that can be applied in order to achieve their desired strategic effects.
And would you personally support such strikes if Iran rejects US proposal on this Iranian nuclear program deal?
Well, you know, look, I'm not involved in the specific negotiations, so you know, it's a difficult call, but the fact of the matter is that one has to have credible military force for these negotiations to proceed. And the combination of the capabilities that reside with the Israeli government as well as the United States are ones that are significant enough that underlie that credibility. So the potential of significant strikes that would reduce or perhaps even eliminate Iran's potential nuclear breakout, if you will, is a real one.
And also, Iranian military has called for a preemptive strike on a US base in the Indian Ocean before US strategic bombers stationed there can be deployed to attack targets in Iran. What could happen in such case? And do you feel that it could be as a negotiating tactics from Iran?
It is relatively implausible that, you know, I just spoke to you about the credibility of military threats. And frankly, that's not a credible threat that Iran's capable of conducting. Or if they did, as you saw with the response when they attacked Israel with over 200 ballistic missiles, we have the capacity to defend against such an assault.
And what is your assessment of the recent US military strikes on Houthis in Yemen?
It's about time. The new administration is taking a much more appropriate steps in eliminating the Houthis' capacity and capability to continue to shut down the Red Sea. And I think you'll see a continued application of force in that regard.
Let's cover also recent incident with the Signal chat. White House confirms that a journalist has been accidentally added to this chat where attacks plan were discussed by U.S. national security team. How harmful is this for U.S. national security, and what is your reaction to such incident?
Well, the fact of the matter is sensitive communications at every level of one's government need to be protected, and the established means that exist to conduct those discussions need to be adhered to.
Also, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has reoriented U.S. military to prioritize deterring China's seizure of Taiwan and also shoring up homeland defense by assuming risk in Europe. However, what is your reaction to such change of focus of new U.S. administration from Europe to China and Taiwan?
Well, it's a strategic decision that clearly the current administration is implementing. I believe that the national security strategy of the United States requires the United States to remain engaged around the world. This has been a fundamental tenet of U.S. national security strategies for over the last 30 years. And it doesn't mean that the United States is withdrawing from Europe, but the United States does recognize the significance of the capabilities and capacity that China under President Xi is building up and is responding accordingly.
Also, yes, President Donald Trump has directed to create an Iron Dome over the continental U.S. to protect the United States against the air threats from adversaries around the globe. What is your assessment of this idea of creating a big Iron Dome over the United States?
Well, it is a very challenging problem or challenging endeavor. It's important to recognize that Iron Dome over Israel is about half the size of the state of Rhode Island. For your audience, Rhode Island is the smallest state in the United States. So it's a very, very small area. And it's very different to conduct a point defense of a small area that's defined in, a couple of hundred square miles, as opposed to the entirety of the United States of America. So the Department of Defense is actively working to develop a concept of operations and an architecture that are going to be proposed, which will likely go to the White House and President Trump's consideration in the coming weeks. Now, the solution is going to need to include not just interceptors for ballistic missile defense, and there's some out there who believe that that's not even necessary, and that it's the more likely means of attack will be cruise missiles, and therefore a large component of this system may be improved air defenses using fighter aircraft and other means. So it is a program that is yet to be defined and will take many years to put into place, as well as significant additional resources, and these decisions have yet to be completed.
Also, President Donald Trump announced the Pentagon's decision to move forward with the next generation fighter jet F-47. Do you support this idea, and how could this influence U.S. military capabilities?
Well, I think that the president's decision to move forward on the F-47, also known as the next generation air dominance fighter, is most likely to be the most important defense decision that he makes during his entire term. And that's because our entire way of waging war, integrating the operations of all our service components, depends on control of the air or air superiority. Without that, We place all our military personnel from all our services and their missions at risk. No major military campaign can succeed without air superiority. You're experiencing that today in your fight with the Russians. So by moving the F-47 forward with a contract award, President Trump is assuring the U.S. Air Force's ability to provide air superiority for the nation for decades to come. So I believe it's a great decision and look forward to continued progress on developing that aircraft.
I know as this project is still being prepared and assessed and also still in progress, but what could be F-47's chances over the Russia's newest aircraft like Su-57 and other new generation Russia's fighter jets?
Piece of cake. That is a American fighter pilot euphemism that it would be hands down the winner. And quite frankly, let me take you back to the current situation. If Ukraine had started this conflict, and I dare say Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if 3 years ago Ukraine had possessed a squadron or two of F-35s. These aircraft, modern fifth generation, and the F-47 is an example of the first sixth generation fighter, are so capable that they possess war deterring and war winning capabilities.
So it seems like to be bad news for Vladimir Putin, his worst nightmare right now.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, General Deptula, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава, thank you very much.